So should you get a PhD? And this is something, regardless of which way you want to go, that you really should take a second and think about it. Because if you do want to get a PhD, now is the time. You want to go directly from graduating in with a bachelor's degree right into a PhD school. It's not something you want to wait on. Because it's very difficult. Once you get out in the world, you get a job, you start getting a regular paycheck, it's really hard to give that up and go back to school. So you really should take a minute and say, do I want to continue on with my education, or am I done? And in a basic sense, really, if you're interested in teaching K through 12, being a high school teacher, or if you're interested in going on to a health profession, no, you don't need a PhD. Teaching high school, you get a credential, you're ready to go. Health profession, you go get an MD or a vet degree, you're good to go. If you're interested in teaching at a 4-year college, then yes, you have to get a PhD to do that. So if you want to be a college professor somewhere, you absolutely have to get a PhD. And if you're interested in working in the industry, then maybe. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about right now. Is what are the pros and cons of going into the industry with a bachelor's degree? And there are pluses and minuses. And remember, it's okay if you want to just say you're done and go and get a job in the industry with a bachelor's degree. That's fine, but there's a couple of points I want to make sure that you know about before you make that decision. So there's some things that people don't commonly discuss that you should know about before you make that decision. But if you say, okay, and knowing that, I want to go and just get right into the industry, that's fine. And but we want to understand that. And just in general, when you say, does somebody want to get a PhD, it really comes down to yourself. Do you want to continue on with your education? Are you kind of done with college? You really want to move on with your life? You don't want to be a student anymore. You want to start getting a paycheck and start living your life and, doing other things. That's fine. Graduate with a bachelor's degree, go get a job. And we'll talk about that later. But if you're like, I want to continue on with my education, I really like the academic setting. Moreover, if you really like thinking about chemistry more than doing it. So as opposed to being in the lab, do you like thinking about what's going on inside of the lab? Planning out syntheses, looking at mechanisms, doing calculations, measuring things, understanding things like that, more of the cerebral end, then you might want to think about getting a PhD. Really, do you like being in school? Do you like taking classes and continuing on? Because that's really what you're going to do, is be in school for another 5 years. And so I'll make another video here in a minute where we talk about, what's it like going through a PhD program. So really what I want you to understand is what's the pros and cons about having a bachelor's degree versus a PhD and going into the industry. So the pros for having a bachelor's degree is it's much easier to get a job. So there are way more jobs for a bachelor's degree chemist, that the PhD degree ones are much fewer, and so they're harder to get. And with this, you can get a job almost anywhere. So, like old local water boards and other things like that, they're always looking to hire bachelor's degree chemists. So it's very easy for you to stay in a particular area. So you could say, I really want to stay in the Bay Area. It's not that hard because there's so many industries that are looking for bachelor's degree chemists. And so it seems like it's a little bit easier to get a bachelor's degree job than it is to get a PhD. The other beauty is once you get your bachelor's degree, you're done. You're qualified to go get a job in the industry and go and start getting a paycheck and doing all those other things. So like I said, there's more jobs, more variety, in terms of different industries. Look at that. And overall, the difference between a bachelor's degree and a PhD is how deeply into the industry do you want to get. And so at the bachelor's degree, there's a little bit less responsibility. You're more of somebody's sort of telling you what to do, and so other people are taking the larger responsibility of, is this working or not? So if you get into a project and it's maybe not working so well, somebody else is really responsible for figuring out what's going on with that and telling you how to kind of fix those things. So it's a lot, it seems to be a little bit less stressful because you don't have that much responsibility. But one thing I want you to understand, and this is something that I've actually seen, and it's important for you to know before you go on, that with a bachelor's degree, your salary caps out after about 10 years. So after about 10 years in the industry, that amount of money that you're making is about the most that you can possibly make. And, there's always exceptions to the rule. This is kind of a cut hard and fast, but I want you to understand this is kind of pretty well true. The idea is you as a bachelor's degree chemist can only earn so much money for the industry, and so they can only afford to pay you a certain amount. And this is a true story. So I worked in the industry right after I graduated with my Ph.D. in chemistry. I got a job in the industry. So I was there, got a job, zero experience. So I've never worked in an industry before. They paid me a certain amount of money. And at the same time, they hired somebody else who had 10 years of experience and a master's degree. And they refused to pay that person the same amount of money as I made starting with a Ph.D. They could not do it. They said, we just cannot do that. And that was where I was at starting. So that's the idea. With a bachelor's degree, there's not a lot of room for advancement. As always, there's exceptions to the rule, but it's really hard for you to get into the managerial positions. So, like project director or vice president and things like that. Really, that's for people who have gotten the PhD. When you get a PhD, you're really saying that that's what I'm interested in. So that's the difference. Easy to get a job, less responsibility, but you're really going to cap out after a while, and you're really kind of looking at being a technician more or less, unless you take some kind of variant, but you're really not going to get into a managerial position. So with a PhD, that's really the pro. You have unlimited advancement, so you can move all the way up to president of a company and being the advisor to the United States president on matters of science and things like that. You can go all the way up. The other pro is you use your brain more. Do you really want to work in the lab, or do you want to work behind the desk? So with a PhD, you're the one that is thinking about things. You're the one planning stuff out, and that's really what a PhD does, is trains you how to think, to solve problems. And so you are going to be doing a lot more of the thought process. You're going to make more money. So like I said, I started more than most bachelor's degree people make, and there's a little bit more wider variety of the jobs. So I'll talk about this more when I talk about what's it like to have a PhD. But there are certain types of jobs that just are not available for a bachelor's degree chemist. So that's something to think about. But having a PhD is not all perfection. There are some other things. You want to understand this. The cons are, you're going to it's just going to take you another 5 years to get your PhD, at least. And maybe you might need a postdoctoral position after that. So you're looking at a long period of time. But you really need to ask yourself, do I want that ability to advance? Is that something I really need in the long run? And if the answer is yes, you really should probably think about getting a PhD. So it is 5 more years, and there are fewer jobs. So there's just not as many. So for a typical, where I worked at in the industry, there was maybe 4 or 5 PhDs, and then there were like 15 or 20 bachelor's degree people. So there's fewer people thinking and more people doing. So it's harder to get a job. They do expect more out of you. And then the main thing is, there's a lot more responsibility. You're the one that, when problems arise, that's what you're getting paid for, is fixing the problems. And when I was working in the industry, at 5 o'clock rolled around, all the bachelor's degree people went home, and the PhD people were the one that were staying there trying to, make sure that things were happening. So if you get paid more, they expect more out of you. And just to give you an example, when I was there, one of the chemists was, short time. He was going to get a job somewhere else, and he just basically stopped working on whatever project he was doing. And in hindsight, they should have just told him to leave. But for like 2 weeks, he just didn't do anything on his project. And we were working for a customer, and the customer was just getting raving mad about how nothing was happening. You could literally hear him talking to the main manager, and you could hear the screaming coming over the phone because this guy's business is tied to our product. And so this guy didn't talk to the customer. He didn't do any work. The customer was boiling mad. And then after he left, they came to me and said, here you go. Here's this project. You got a PhD. You need to fix this. And, I sat down, looked at what was doing, called up the guy, told him I was on the job. I was going to do, I was going to fix what was going on, did daily calls with the person, told him what I was doing. Finally, the customer calmed down. And we got the project done, and they were actually happy with it. They understood it really wasn't our fault, but we got the project done, and then this customer actually gave us more work because we sat down and worked through it with them. So something more to think about, just so you understand those basic differences. And I'll talk a little bit more about, what is it actually like to have a PhD, and what does it take to kind of get into the graduate school. So that'll be another video I'll make here in a minute.